Right, so this is a new venture I've been mulling over, not unlike the Isle of Mull, I suppose, to do vague connection word things. Ain't language beautiful? Education is beautiful, as Filthy Frank would have said, or says in one of his videos. Anyway, I'm I'm spurging on, um, and going off topic. This is a new venture called slash last names have history. And now I know there's a channel out there on YouTube where it looks into the where they look into the origins of names and family names, and there's even like I suppose a cool kind of multi-part thing where how did surnames come to be, occupational names, all the rest of it. But I thought I'd just start with, well, I you know I find last names and origins of things interesting in general. So I'm going to start with one that's my grandma, my gran Janet Roberts. She used to be her maiden name, if you will, used to be Aveyard, and it's not a very common last name. It's mostly it was mostly prevalent and in the 85% category in in Yorkshire, well, West Yorkshire, where I'm from. Supposed to be quite a localized name, or just a name that, but it kind of spread around, sort of like names like Dawson and Hardacre. Hardacre was my grand's mum's maiden name, and I'm gonna do an episode on that too. I'm gonna also gonna do an episode on Dawson. Um, but yeah, let's get to it. So the earliest known connection may be from Affa's enclosure, possibly derived, or which then became associated with the Brittany Norman French word Ave or Ave, derived from which is also derived from the ancient Welsh slash Brittonic or Brythonic, I guess, Celtic derived word, which was probably coincidentally similar for some reason, because language is fascinatingly weird sometimes, with the word well, Avon, Ave, our, Ave, Avon. That's to do with a river. So maybe yeah, yard. That's yard. Yeah, yard is like is either a Norman French or Anglo-Saxon derivative or proto word to do with a guard or a yard, which I suppose would it's a bit obscure. Um, so it's multiple origins. One of those old one of those old names that then became a kind of, I suppose, distinguished, I like to think, Norman noble name, which then sort of died off from between 1100 and something to then it cropped up again in 1540 when um, when it was adopted by a Dewsbury resident, Robert Jane, or it's spelled Jan YN, so it's probably Janin. It's probably Janin or it probably is Jane actually. It's not a name I've come across, and it's probably doesn't really um, exist anymore. Just like how, for example, 100 years before there was the whole thing with Perkin Warbeck and his pal, with the Pretender Kings. Um, for example, as a little nod to a name that doesn't exist anymore, and that name in that time and then the name became quite popular in Wakefield, Wakefield College, and also, um, yeah, the the documentary maker and cruise singer Jane McDonald, if any of you have seen her programs, um, over here, and if any, I guess those of you over the other side of the pond have seen, like UK TV and stuff like that, you might know the Cruising with Jane McDonald. She's from there. Can't remember who else is from Wakefield, but yeah. But yeah, it's I always thought the name sounded very vaguely French to me, so I think it's a name that became it started off as sort of proto Welsh brigantes kind of tribal, I guess, kind of thing. Then became Anglo-Saxon, and then became Norman French, and the that was the more modern um name that was let, because it seems like you'll see by following the links to the sources I'm gonna put in anyway, where it was Haveyard, which it sounds like almost Norman, kind of almost leftover Viking-ish, um, where nobody used the name for hundreds of years, and then somebody picked it up, either because they liked the sound of the name, and or um, somehow this Robert Jane or Janine, um, he maybe looked into he somehow got some kind of lowdown on some of his family history, where maybe found out it was descended from like a minor nobleman with a plot of land somewhere hundreds of years before he was born. So you never know. So yeah, speaking of famous-ish people and so on and so forth, there's two known people with that name in the modern sense. First is a Walter Aveyard, who was born in 1918, died in 1985. I haven't looked up how he died yet. He was born in Hemsworth, and that's actually a kind of connection to me because that's where my mum was brought up. They're usually, I think, her family and stuff are from like Leeds and so on and so forth, I guess. But Hemsworth is a weird one, and not only is it known for being the last name of the famous Australian Hemsworth brothers, um, Chris, Luke, Liam. Although I was named after Liam Neeson because my mum fancied him. Um, that's technically in West Yorkshire, but it's like it's a weird go. I say go between like it's depending whereabouts you go from Hemsworth. It kind of can go into Selby, which is North Yorkshire, which is also a name in itself, a last name in itself, Selby. But also you can get to Pontefract, and that's another Norman place. Pontefract is in fact derived from the old French/Middle English word for broken bridge, and also Pontefract is where Toby Kebbell is from, who then um, practically grew up in Nottingham, which is probably how he met Paddy Considine in like drama studies and what have you. They're both Nottingham based. Him, Shane Meadows, Paddy Considine. First thing they starred in together was a very harrowing psychological film called Dead Man's Shoes. I'm just going to recommend that as well, but it's hard going. It's not like I'll just stick it on. It's like, well, you can stick it on, but it's besides the point. It's yeah, I'll stop talking about that. But and also yeah. Before I get back on track, Toby Kebbell also did play a character called Liam in the very first episode or second episode of Black Mirror, where he was married to Jodie Whittaker, who was also born in West Yorkshire. The entire history of you, a good paranoid episode. But yeah, the second person I have on the list, I am reading from a list. I'm sorry, because my short-term memory is absolute dog shite sometimes. Is yeah, an American author and screenwriter, Victoria Aveyard, who is known for one book in particular I looked up like about 10 minutes ago. The Red Queen. Maybe I'll put that. I'll add that to like a personal list to read books because I'm trying to read books more in general. He was born in 1990. And I was looking at reading a wiki page and it says she's of Scottish and Italian ancestry. Um, but I suppose I'm going to do a little comparative nod. Um, yeah, names like Neeson and Dawson are they can be technically Irish, for example, but they came from parts of England mostly, back and forth, um, as you will, and probably to do with medieval slash early modern period kind of land ownership stuff. I wonder if the Scottish paternal granddad had an ancestor who was a descendant of medieval noblemen from further south, as it were, than from Scotland, way further south in comparison. From my neck of the woods, and had descendants with Scottish people, and because I think the land I can't remember what it's called, what the Irish call it, but the equivalent of land ownership in like the I guess what Americans call the Scots Irish kind of areas, probably from that. Anyway, that was the obscure but not too obscure, I think. Uh, Last name Aveyard, name of my maiden name of my dear grandma Janet, and also by extension her dad Norman Aveyard. In fact, yeah, her parents were Norman and Hilda. That's almost modern day Viking or Norman, Norman itself, which I'm quite proud of. With how it sounds. Some names have an inherent way of sounding cool. So yeah, that was the first episode of um, Sir slash last names have history, and I might be doing a second one sometime shortly after this. So stay tuned.